Welcome. Today's session will cover Control-M for backup and recovery for Control-M server using a Postgres database. Some of what I'm going to be showing today will apply to any database, but I'll be focusing specifically on Postgres in today's session. My name is Darryl Watley. I'm a senior TSA with the Control-M support group out of Austin, Texas. I've been with BNC for about 17 years now. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, today's Connect with Control-M, Backup and Recovery. I want to start by going and just talking a little bit about today's agenda. We're going to be covering backups. First, the types of backups. We'll be covering two specifically, hot and cold. What is backed up? I'll talk a little bit about what is actually backed up during the backup process and how they differ. What we need to do to prepare for a backup, a little of the housekeeping necessary to make that happen. Then I'll demo the two backup methods that I'll be covering today. Then I'll actually go through a restore process. We'll talk about what it takes to prep for the restore process, what conditions need to be in place, and then I'll actually demo the two restores I'm using for both hot and cold. And then I'm going to talk about some just tips and tricks, just basically go over some stuff that I'd like you to know in terms of the backup process so you're prepared. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. All right, to get started, types of backups. Like I mentioned, we're going to cover two today, hot backup and cold backup. Talking about the hot backup, this backup is performed while the product is active. In other words, you can back up your Control-M server as the product is online. As the Control-M server and the database are active, you can cut a backup. Recovers to the point of the failure. What I mean by this is that you can actually roll up to the last transaction in the database in a recovery scenario, provided you have the archive logs, and I'll talk more about that when we get into the demo. But this allows you to cover all the way up to the point of the actual failure of the database, provided everything is backed up, including the archive logs. Our archive logs are not backed up. These need to be backed up outside this process. Well, I'll show you what I mean by that, but we're going to talk a little bit about the archive logs and how they are not backed up as a part of this backup procedure. You need to make sure those are backed up using the file system backup that you have in place for your server. And then as a restore process, I'll talk a little bit about how you would do that. Cold backup. Cold backup is performed while the product is inactive. In other words, the Control-M server is down. The database must be up, but the Control-M server itself is down. Recovery time recovers to the time of the last backup. What I mean by this is that it's a point-in-time recovery. If you cut a backup at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're getting the state of the server at 9 o'clock. If you recover at 11 o'clock, you don't have any information between there. It doesn't roll up to the point of the last transaction. Cold backup, I just threw this in here, is quite a bit faster. You'll notice here when we do our backups that the cold backup is really, really quick. But you do have to have the Control-M server down in order to do it. All right, moving along. What is backed up? Hot backup. All the data in the database as well as the database application files are included. What I mean by this is that it includes all of the data inside the data files as well as the PGSQL directory and all of the binaries therein. So if you do a backup using hot backup, you get everything inside the PGSQL directory. This is quite a bit different than the cold backup, and I'll show you that when we do the demos. Data is stored in the following files. There's going to be first of all, a Control-M. There's going to be a one tar file that has the name of the Postgres instance tag to it, .tar. There's going to be a PGSQL.tar file, and then two SH files that are used to tar and untar the data used by us. So there's a total of 4 files in the backup directory that we assign when we do the hot backup. And again, you'll see this in the backup process. This file here, the name of that file is going to change. The PGSQL file is always going to be the same name. And again, this contains all of the binaries inside the PGSQL directory. It's literally a tar of that directory, not including the data files. Those are included in this file. Cold backup. The cold backup uses a very different method. It uses a single file, which is a delimited file, and it's basically a dump of the database into a flat file. So the it's using single delimited and all the content of the database is contained in one file. This file is not compressed. You can go and look at it. I'll cat it out for you when we're done, and you'll see that it's just basically a dump of the database. All right, so let's prepare for our first backup, which is going to be our hot backup. First thing I'm going to show you is how to turn archive mode on. Archiving must be on in order for a hot backup to be performed. We're going to turn on the archive mode using CTM menu. We're going to need to have a location for the archive logs. This location must be empty, and I highly recommend, it actually won't work, that it not be in the PGSQL directory. In other words, it needs to be located somewhere else outside the PGSQL directory. The reason for that is that the backup tries to wrap up that into that tar file, and the backup will fail if you try to put it actually into that directory. And it's best practice anyways not to include in that directory. We recommend that you put it on a separate file system if at all possible, just for redundancy's sake. And then we're going to check the database status. I'm going to show you how to check to see what your current archive status is for your database, just so you can be assured that everything's working. Then we're going to talk about the destination folder for the backup must be empty. So there's an archive log directory an archive log directory that we're going to need to provide. There's also a backup directory location that we're going to need to provide. This again needs to be empty. And I'm going to stress this a couple times. This backup directory needs to be empty every time you cut the hot backup. It does not write over the old backup. If it sees that there's files in there in this location, it's going to fail. It's going to stop and tell you that there's something in the directory. All right, so I'm going to jump into a demo now. We're going to turn the archive mode on, set up the backup location, perform a backup, and then talk a little bit about maintaining the archive logs. So let me go ahead and get over to my screen here. This will just take me a minute. Jump up my two screens. Let me go ahead and get this taken care of. I'm going to share my desktop. Should be able to see it now, and I have 2 sessions going. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of this just so you can see where I start from. So the first thing I talked about was turning the archive mode on. Currently my archive mode is off. So I'm going to go into CTM menu. And I'm going to just show you quickly what the state of my Control-M server is. Just going to do a check all. You can see that my SQL server, my Postgres database is running, but Control-M and the config agent are not running. So I'm going to go ahead and back out of this and go into the database menu, number 2. Most of our work today will be done in the database menu. We're going to go into number 2, and then we're going to go into the actual management, number 1. Actually, before I do that, let me just show you quickly the report. We're going to go in here a few times, but the database status, you can actually see in here my database is up, but my archive mode is off. So currently no archive. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set my archive mode on. I'm going to back out of here, go to database maintenance. Oops, I'm sorry. Database management. And then I'm going to go to set database archive mode. It's going to bring up the default of off. I want on. Now it's going to ask me for the location of our archive logs. And I'm going to give it an archive location here. I'm just going to cut and paste this in here so I don't fat finger it. Okay, now it says the archive log the switch has been set, so it's been set to on, but you'll notice it also says the server needs to be rebooted. Not server, I should say, the database itself needs to be rebooted. So what we need to do is quickly go back to this menu, and we're just going to stop the database and then start it. Data's been started. Now let's quickly go back out and look at our report again. And we're going to look at the database status, and sure enough, archive mode is on. and our database is up. Okay, so now that I've done that, I want to show you what's in the archive log itself. Now I created this archive directory out here, and you can see there's one tag file in here right now. Now this archive log directory, what's going to happen in here is now it's going to create archive logs, what we call wall files. These wall files are about 16 megs in size, and they're going to increase for every 16 megs of transactions in the database. What Postgres is going to do at this point is create another wall file, and it will create these sequentially, infinitely. It doesn't rotate through them or anything, so we're going to talk a little bit about how you manage those here with the hot backup, but at this point there's going to be a wall file for every 16 megs of transactions in the database. So it's something you want to manage, and I'll talk a little bit about that more as well when we get into the tips and tricks section. All right, so now that we've done that, we've got our archive log turned on, we can go ahead and go back, and we can actually cut a hot backup. Before I do that though, just so you know that I'm telling you the truth here, I'm going to go ahead back to my Control-M server, and I'm going to start this guy up. So I'm going to go ahead and start my config agent, or actually I'm just going to start Control-M first. It should only take a second. We got that going. Now let's start our config agent. Config agents are running, and just to verify that, I'm going to do an shctm. Sure enough, PRF, everything's running, looks good. So our Control-M server is hot and running. All right, so now let's go back to the database menu, number 2. And we're going to go ahead and go into maintenance. And we're going to do a hot database backup, number 2. Okay, so the first thing it's going to ask for is the database directory structure. And again, I mentioned this has to be empty. I've already created this directory. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. And then it's going to ask for the administrator password. This is the administrator password for the database, the one you give it when you created the install. Give it that. And then it's going to run. Now I want you to notice this is going to take a little time to finish. But again, the Control-M servers are online, so shouldn't really have any effect. While it's doing that, you can already see that I've got one wall file out here. There's already one 16 meg file out here in the archive directory. And I do want to mention while we're waiting for this backup to finish, this first file is a tag file. It just basically tells me that the archive mode was turned on, and it gives me the specific date and time that that was done. There's no data in the file. It's simply a tag. This first file is an actual archive file or archive log file. I also want to take you over to the, now we've got 2 wall files. Now I'm going to take you over to the actual backup directory that that we are currently backing up into, and you can see that it's creating, it's already created the tar.sh and the untar.sh. What it's doing now is it's backing up the PGSQL directory. So this is the directory I was talking about. It's creating a complete copy of this directory. I'm just going to cd into there. Oops. PGSQL. Oh, wait a minute. Where am I? I'm sorry. And it's backing up all of these subdirectories in the PGSQL directory. All right. So now let's go back up and take a look. The backup is finished. And it tells us initial backup has been taken. Keep an archive, DB archive. Keep a backup of the DB archive files. Keep a backup of the initial backup file. So it's telling you basically that you need to back these up separately. In other words, we've got this with your file system level backup. So you've got the backup that actually exists in the hot backup directory and their archive files themselves. I'm going to show you. Now we're going to go back into that backup directory. Oops. Let's go to hot. Take a look. Now you can see we have the 4 files that I talked about. Again, the backup of the data files, the backup of the PGSQL directory, and then the tar.sh and the untar.sh. Okay, and we can go and take a look now. I want to show you what actually took place in our archive directory. There is a tag file in here now called backup. This tag file is readable. We'll go ahead and take a look at what's in it. Got to include the space in there. And you can see it basically says start wall file, stop wall file, checkpoint, start time, stop time. Basically gives you the times that the backup was done. But here's the point I want to get across to you. This goes to the management. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but it backed up using this tag, and you'll notice there's a wall file here also with this tag. In other words, they mask each other, 51 and 51. When I get to the management section, we'll note that a little more, but I want you to just take note of the fact that these two files match at this point. The others don't. And this backup tag file is in this location. All right, so now our hot backup is finished. We've got our backup directory. It's got all the files in it, and we've confirmed that our backup is done. And we did that with our Control-M server still online. So now I'm going to go back over to here, and I'm going to go ahead and run a cold backup. Now, the cold backup, the only requirement I have is that I have a cold backup directory location. And again, that location kind of needs to be empty. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It doesn't necessarily have to be empty, but it does have to have a unique name for each backup file. And I'll show you why here in a second. All right, so let's go in and start a cold backup. Now you'll notice that I have not changed the archive mode of my server. You can do a cold backup with the archive mode on. That's not a problem because it's not actually doing anything with any of the data files. It's doing simply a database dump. So let's go ahead and start the cold backup. Oh, I'm sorry. What did I do wrong? I left my Control-M server online. So I've got to go shut that down. So let me go make sure that happens. So let me go in here to maintenance. Actually, I don't want to do that. What I want to do is get out of this. I want to go to Control-M, and I want to stop my Control-M server. So I'm going to stop the config agent first. That'll take a second. And then I'm going to stop the Control-M server, number 8. Thinking, okay, so it's done. Control-M server's down. I'm going to verify that back over here, shctm, and there are no current Control-M server processes running. All right, so let's go back into the database maintenance menu. Again, let's go to number 2, maintenance. And let's go ahead and perform a cold backup. And the first thing it asks for is the backup file location. I'm going to go ahead and give it that. Now, it asks for the actual, not just the location, but the actual name of the file. This has to be a fully qualified path of the name of the file. So it doesn't just the file name itself. The title here is a little misleading. It says backup file, but it actually needs the fully qualified path. So my backup file name is going to be cold backup 1. I have the choice of whatever I want to name it. I'm going to go ahead and hit that. Again, it's going to ask for the administrator password. I'm going to hit enter, and it's done. Now you see how fast that was. That was very, very quick, much faster than a hot backup. But my Control-M server is down at this point, so I am taking an outage. I'm going to go ahead and show you what's in that directory. Oh, you can see we have lots of wall files now too. We're going to go into the cold backup directory. And you see I have one file. I'm going to cat this file out for you real quick and just kind of show you what's in there. And you can see there is a lot of data. There's some, it dumps the stored procedures, dumps all the data structure, database data into this backup file. And when you get down to the end here, you'll see it's actually running a Postgres database dump. That's what it's actually doing. So this is very different from the hot backup. Hot backup uses archive method. This uses just a straight database dump method. All right. So those are our two backups. Let me go back over to the slide presentation. So we turned on the archive mode, we set up backup location, we performed the backup, and then we talked a little bit about maintaining the archive logs. I'm going to get more into that as we go along. Okay, so preparing for a cold backup. We talked about that. We already did the cold backup, but we basically Control-M processes need to be inactive. So you saw me shut down the Control-M database server. We went ahead and looked at the status of the database, or the Control-M server was down. The database was obviously up, and then we needed to give it a destination folder. And again, I mentioned the fact that the destination folder needed to be empty. Now, in the case of a cold backup, if I use that same file name again, it will not overwrite that file. So if I perform another cold backup, I have to use a different file name for the backup file. I can't use the same one over and over. Or the directory just simply has to be empty. All right, so we went over the cold backup demo. We shut down the Control-M server processes. We performed the backup. And like I said, we talked about maintaining those backup files. You basically want to just make sure that directory is empty. What I recommend, and I just want to go back over here. Let me go back over to my sharing session. I want to talk a little bit about this backup file. So if I make another backup here, I would want to make sure that I name this file differently. Also, you want to make sure that you're backing up this directory with your, this is my cold backup directory. You want to make sure you're backing up this directory using a file level system backup. So if you need to recover to it, you've got that backup available. I want to take a moment and go back to the archive directory. I don't feel that I did a great job of explaining this backup or what needs to be removed. -LTR. So what I mean by that is, you can see that I've got a backup in here, and I've got a series of WAL files after that. When we maintain these archive logs, every backup you cut is going to put a backup tag inside the archive directory. And that backup tag is going to reference one file right above it. It's going to have this backup tag and then one file right above it. You can see these match. Now this is very important. Everything above this file, in other words, anything older than this file, can be removed at this point because I've got the backup. These files cannot be removed. If you remove these files, you cannot roll back your transactions. In other words, the recovery will fail when we go to do the recovery phase. But at this point, I can remove these two files. Now, if I cut another hot backup right now, what's going to happen is another file like this is going to show up right here at the bottom. And it's going to reference the WAL file just preceding it. I can remove all of these files once I have that new hot backup performed. So that's the way you maintain the archive directory, is through the backup process. Once the hot backup is cut, you take the WAL file that's just before it, the one that it's referencing, just like I mentioned, and you remove everything above that. Do not remove this file. If you do, the recovery will fail. I know I'm being dramatic here, but I just want to make sure you understand that these two files are connected. So anything above this can be removed. Anything below it needs to stay in order to roll forward. These should all, this entire directory structure should be backed up using your file level system backup. So these are not backed up as a part of the hot backup process. So you want to make sure your file system level is backing these up, as well as the backup that we're doing with the hot backup process. So there's two components, this directory and then the backup directory itself, where those 4 files exist. Okay, let me go back over to my slides now that I jumped around here. Oops, let me go stop sharing. I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to jump to the next slide here. All right, so now I want to get into restores and what it takes to restore. So performing a restore, some of the opposite rules apply here. So the first thing is the Control-M processes need to be inactive. For a hot restore, both the Control-M server and the database need to be down. If you think about it, it makes sense because we're going to replace the PGSQL directory in its entirety. In other words, the entire database, all data files, and all the binaries are going to get replaced because that's what we backed up. It's also going to roll the transactions forward. Once the hot restore is finished, it's going to set the archive mode to off. It will automatically start the database for you at the end, but it's going to set the archive mode to off. You're going to need to go back and reset it again. And when you do that, you're going to need to clean out the archive log directory before you start that. And I'll show you that when we get to that point. Cold restore, the CTM menu or CTM Control-M server processes should be down, but the database has to be up. It's different than the hot restore. The cold restore, the database has to be up because, again, it's inserting data. It's not recovering the data file structure. Use the CTM menu command to execute the restore. So we're going to use the CTM menu to actually do the restores in this situation. I'm going to go ahead and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a restore demo using the hot backup. Then I'm going to use the cold backup, and then I'm going to validate the Control-M server processes. Let me get back over to my demo window here, and I'm going to go to management, and I'm going to stop the database. I'm going to do a hot restore. So I gave it my backup directory, hot backup, and then I gave it my archive log directory location, archive log 1. And then it's going to start the archive log, or the restore. Now, like before, this recovery is rather long. It'll take a couple minutes to complete it. I don't have a lot of data in this database. What actually takes the most time in this process is not the actual database backup, but it's the restore of the PGSQL directory. That's actually where it's spending most of its time. This will just take a few minutes. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is once this is done, I'm going to be able to go in here and actually remove all of the files from the archive log directory. The reason being is because when this comes back up, that's why I was pointing out that the archive mode is set to off automatically when the restore is done for a hot backup. These files are no longer needed. They're not valid anymore. And it automatically sets to archive mode off. So we'll remove these files and then set our archive mode back on. Shouldn't take too much longer here. And there we go. So it's done. And then, for the sake of being completely redundant, you can see here it says complete switch archive mode status off. Postgres reboot is required. And I just want to show you, when I get out of this, that one important feature here is that, oops, I want to go to number 3 on the report. And then I want to go to number 2 and show the database status, or I'm sorry, number 1. And you can see the current DB status is up and my archive mode is indeed off. All right, so now we go back over to my archive log location. I've got all these files in here. None of these files are valid anymore. So I'm going to remove all of them. Now we have nothing in the archive log directory. Then I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to go back out. I'm going to go to management. I'm going to set my archive mode to, set my archive mode to on. And again, it's going to ask for the archive log directory location. I've already emptied it out. Now, if that directory was not empty, then this will fail. It'll come back and tell you that there's files in there, and you can't have files already existing in an archive log directory. Now it says on. Just as before, we have to stop the database and start it back up. Okay, and if we go out and look at our database status, indeed, the archive mode again is on, and our database status is up. And I just want to show you now what is in the archive log directory, and sure enough, there's that tag file that we talked about before that gets created when the archive log gets turned on. So we have just completed restoring from a hot backup. Now we're going to restore from a cold backup. Now, right now, my Control-M server is down. Oops. See, there's nothing running. SHCTM shows no processes running, but my database status is up. Obviously, we showed that. So we're going to go back and actually run a cold restore. I'm going to show you quickly how that works. So we're going to go to a cold restore number 5. Again, it asks for the restore file location. I cut and paste that in there. Ask for the administrator password because it's actually logging on to the database for this process. And it's done. You can see again, it's very, very fast. We actually have that running. Now I'm going to quit out of here, go back up to Control-M Manager, and I'm just going to do a 2 start all. SQL Server is already running. And then we do a check all, and we can indeed see that everything is running at this point. SQL Server is running, Control-M Server is running, configuration agent is running as well. And that completes a cold backup. And again, you can do a cold backup and a hot backup interchangeably. One doesn't matter to the other. It doesn't matter. You don't have to change the archive mode settings or anything like that. All right, so let me go back over to my slides. I'm going to stop the sharing here. Okay, so just to recap, we did a restore using a hot backup, we did a restore using a cold backup, and then we validated the Control-M server processes. All right, so let's talk about tips and tricks here. I just want to talk about a few things for you in terms of the backup strategy. Recommend you do a backup once a day using jobs. We recommend that you set up a job. Obviously, you have the best scheduling tool in the world with Control-M, and we would like you, obviously, to use that to schedule your backups. So I'll show you a command here in a second where you can do that, but we recommend that you do that, and we recommend that you do a combination of both. If you have the ability to take an outage once a week, it's good to try and get a cold backup in. You see that they're very, very fast. So the window's small, but and not everybody can do that, but it would be good if you can. That basically just gives you a baseline, and then try to do a hot backup once a day if you can do that. There's really, you obviously don't want to do your hot backup in the middle of new day or, when there's a lot of transactions processing. You try to do them in the off time. So if you've got a lull in your schedule, then that's probably the best time to cut the hot backup when there's not a lot going on. Be sure to check the disk space on the archive mode is set on. This is important. As I mentioned, those WAL files get created in 16 meg segments. So what I recommend you do is when you turn the archive mode on, watch those WAL files and see how fast it grows. Everybody's going to be different. It depends on your schedule, the amount of transactions you got going on, how many jobs you got ordering in. There's a lot in it, and it isn't necessarily tied to the jobs. It's the transactions in the database. So it's hard. I can't give you a set equation as to figure out how many of those are going to get generated when. It's best if you just kind of watch it over time and kind of give yourself a baseline. Cold backups are only good at the point of the backup. Cold backups only good up to the point of the backup. Think about what this means to your environment. So one thing I want to point out, and I've had customers that didn't realize this until it happened to them, is that when you cut a cold backup, let's say at 9 o'clock, and you do a restore at 11, say you have an outage and you have to do a restore, the difference between 9 and 11 is not captured. So if your schedule has been running that whole time, any jobs that ran between 9 and 11 are going to rerun because Control-M is going to think you're at the point where you were at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's not going to realize you ran a bunch of jobs in between there. So it's important to understand that when you do a restore, what the effect is going to be on your schedule. Well, the hot backup is really not that important because you're rolling up to the point of the last transaction. But with a cold backup, it is very important to understand that. Moving data between databases. I get this question a lot about how you do this. There is another utility called CTM_backup_BCP, which is very similar to cold backup. It basically does a dump of the data out of the database, but it does it into individual flat files, one for each table within the database. Some people use it as a backup methodology. It certainly works, but it really comes in handy when you're moving data between databases because it's database independent. It doesn't matter what database you had. So if you want to move data from Oracle to Postgres or SQL Server to Postgres or Postgres to SQL Server, you can certainly do that with this utility. It's database independent. And finally, running a backup from within a job. So you're probably asking, well, how do I do that? The way you do that is there's a command line utility that basically does everything that I did today, CTMDB_BCK for a backup. You just give it the password, you can use a password file, the backup directory location, and then whether it's hot or cold. As far as a restore goes, you would not want to schedule jobs to do a restore, obviously. That's not a good idea. So don't do restores on our schedule. But you certainly want to do your backups using a utility, and this is the utility. That utility is documented in the utility guide. So I would recommend that you look at the Control-M Server Utility Guide for specific information. If you have any questions, there's also a couple examples in there on how to use it. But it's pretty straightforward. It's really not that hard to set up. I would also, as a function of this, point out that those directories need to be emptied after each backup. So what I recommend is that you set up a secondary location and copy your files off, both your backup directory and your hot backup directory and your cold backup directory. Move those files into the location and maybe keep a couple copies back on the file system so you can get to them quickly. You can decide how you want to do that, but just remember that those directories need to be emptied before you can execute the next backup, whether it's hot or cold. Okay, and just kind of wrapping up now, connect with Control-M history. Just want to talk a little bit about some of the other ones that we had. Want to point out that we've had other connect with Control-M sessions in the past. There's a whole list of them out there now. We keep adding one each month, so be sure to check them out. There's a lot of good information in these, and they're very good and very technical, so you should get a lot out of them. If you haven't looked at them, I encourage you to do that. And this is the link for those right here at the bottom where you can take a look at them. And finally, I just want to thank you for attending today. I appreciate your time. I hope you got something out of this. I want to point out there's some resources out there. There's a Control-M knowledge article, this in our knowledge base, that talks specifically about managing archive log files and how to do that and how to set up the backups. So you'll want to take a look at that if you have any questions. Control-M server support site. Again, this is where the documentation is that I talk about. You can get the utility guide from here, as well as the administration guide. The administration guide is where the actual backup process is documented. So if you need to go back through that or have questions on it, you can take a look at that. The utility guide, again, is where the BCP utility as well as the backup utility are documented. Upcoming Connect with Control-M webinars. Next month, we will be featuring calling web services with Control-M. Martin DeCastagrini is going to be doing a session on web services and how to connect those into Control-M. Connect Control-M, like I mentioned before, can all be accessed through this link. At the end of this, you're going to get a survey. Please fill that out and let us know what you think, how the session went. I really want to get your feedback. Also, future topics. Make sure that you tell us what you want to hear about. If you got something you want to know about, a feature in the product, you think something that you just don't understand or you want more information on, please be sure to note that, because that's exactly how we determine how we're going to do these, is based on your response. And again, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and our BMC communities. I highly encourage you to go out to the BMC communities. There's a lot of great information out there, and a lot of stuff that users exchange between themselves on how to do things. I'm always amazed what things people are coming up with, things I never thought about with the product, and that's a great resource to get that information. So I highly encourage you to go check that out.